My name's Darren. I'm one of the directors at Primal. This is Joe. He's one of the senior trainers, and we kind of work together with the nutrition side of things for Primal. We're going to do these every month. There's going to be a health matters, if you like, every month on different topics. Next month we've got another guy coming in who's going to do a little talk on setting goals, making changes, how to make changes permanent, etc. Today's one is Nutrition 101. The first ones that I ever do with these are always essentially just a vehicle to get some ideas about where you need help. What areas of nutrition are you good at? What areas of nutrition are you unsure of? For some people it's very much in the details, what macro should I be having, etc. For some people it's as simple as giving something I can have for breakfast instead of cereal. Okay, so today basically we'll go through a few bits and pieces. We've had some questions in already, and then we'll do about 20 minutes on this presentation. Joe will do a little bit as well, and then we'll answer your questions, and just try and get a feel. I'll make notes of what you guys ask, and we'll just get a feel for what you need to know. Okay, so we'll clip along at a fairly good pace. First question that normally comes up, or that you need to be aware of, is how effective is nutrition, or how effective is exercise without nutrition? The answer is not very, to be honest. They've done lots of studies on this, some recent studies from Texas and Massachusetts University, where they've basically looked at how effective. They've done 3 groups. One group basically doing a fat loss program with exercise and nutrition, one doing it just with exercise, one doing it with just nutrition. The ones that do it with just exercise tend to have very poor results at the end of it. They lose in 12 weeks. They tend to lose about half a kilo, not very much. When they do it with nutrition, it's much better. When they do it exercise and nutrition together, it's much better than both of those. The difference between nutrition on its own and exercise on its own is a little bit, it's a bit better, but it's nowhere near as good as the two combined. So, what basically that means is if you're doing an exercise program, exercise workouts and coming to the gym, but you're not sorting out nutrition as well, a lot of people just try and play that calorie game. I've done 1,500 calories on the stepper, or so the machine tells me, therefore I can go and eat 1,000 calories worth of whatever it might be, Big Macs, pork scratching, whatever you fancy, and I'm still in a 500 calorie deficit, so I'm winning. But it doesn't work like that, okay? So if you're exercising and you're not getting the nutrition right, then essentially you're doing a lot of effort for not very much reward. So that's the first thing. You have to take care of the nutrition. What's wrong with our nutrition? Why have we gone so wrong in the world of nutrition? We've had lots of paradigms. First of all, it was don't eat fat, then it's not don't eat sugar, carbs were bad for you, fat was bad for you, protein's going to kill you. Pretty much everything that we can possibly consume at one point or another has been attacked, and we say don't eat that, that's bad for you, and we completely flip our paradigms. Where we are right now, what we know is wrong with our nutrition is essentially processed foods. It's crap food. Some people eat too many carbs, some people eat too much fat, some people eat too much sugar, but essentially the key component that it all comes down to for most people that are struggling is too much processed food, and too much processed food which is being labelled as healthy. So it's not entirely people's fault. They're being told something by the food industry that's not true. Everything gets labelled with a picture of a chicken or a farmyard on it. They find some way to tell you that this is healthy, like a big plate of bland, void of any nutritious crap, but we added some synthetic B vitamins, so now we can market it as being good for your kids because we've added synthetic B vitamins to that. They do this all the time. Margarine, probably one of the worst foods ever invented, but we'll stick a bit of olive oil in there because everybody thinks that olive oil is good for you, so now we've got something that we can market as healthy. And because there's so much confusion, people just don't know, so they tend to go for the buzzwords. Olive oil, I know that's good for me, so anything with olive oil in must be good for me. B vitamins, I know they're good for me, so anything with B vitamins must be good. So that's really how we've gone from a position in 1970 where we had about 2.4% of the population that was overweight and obese. Fast forward to 2000, and we've got 2015 now, but in the year 2000 we had about 64% of the population was overweight, with about 24% of people being obese. So we went about tenfold in that time. Interestingly enough, fat consumption was slashed during that time. Sugar consumption went through the roof, especially in the form of things like cereals and soft drinks. And 10 years on, or 1970, that's when the paradigm changed, about 1974. 20 years on into 1994, and the Centre for Disease Control announces we've got an epidemic of obesity. 10 years after that, we've got an epidemic of diabetes. Those two things go hand in hand. They're both sugar related. Okay, and that comes from not people pouring loads of sugar on their foods, but essentially just the amount of sugar that is actually in food that's being sold. So what's wrong with nutrition? Essentially, where we went wrong is it's fake. We're not eating, or we haven't been previously eating real food. Okay, so next question. Do calories count? Again, this is one that's gone one way, gone the other way. Calories do count, calories don't count. Where we are at the minute with calories, do they count or not? Every study they've done, which is essentially a clinical hospital, what they call a ward study, which is essentially where they stick you in a hospital, lock the door, and they feed you, they exercise you, essentially you are a lab rat. So that they can absolutely 100% control what you're eating compared to what you're putting out, which they work out using expelled breath, how many calories you're burning. So it's a very, very, very precise method, but it's obviously very uncomfortable for the people who are being studied, right? There's a lot to learn in hospital. But whenever they do that, you run a calorie deficit, you get weight loss. Every time they do that, and they run a calorie surplus, they get weight gain. And the weight gain is all weight gain or weight loss is always relative to how much the deficit or the surplus was. So the simple fact of the matter is that calories do count. However, that comes with a caveat. If you had 1,000 calories of good quality chicken and spinach, and then 1,000 calories of, Roundtree's fruit pastels, there's a huge difference in how that affects you. Okay? But to completely ignore calories would be wrong. They do count, but they're not the only thing. Okay? Next question, next one. Tracking. So, does tracking count? Keeping food journals, etc. Absolutely yes. The number one way of making sure that you stick to a diet is essentially through tracking your food intake. Especially if you're a beginner at this. Okay? Whatever gets measured gets changed. Okay? If you're measuring it, you can control it. If you're not measuring it, you can't control it. You've got no idea whether it's going to the positive or it's going to the negative. There is a caveat again with that people tend to have very selective memories. So they will, there's been studies where they've been off by 2,000 calories. They tend to be in obese people. But when they've been off by, they've kept weekly schedules or weekly food journals. And when they've actually added up what people have eaten compared to what they've recorded, again using kind of ward studies, they found that in some cases they've been up to 2,000 calories off. That's a huge amount. 2,000 a day, that's 14,000 calories for a week. Keep multiplying that, that's a hell of a lot of calories to be off. And it's quite common for people to be off. However, it still is an absolute essential. If you are starting on a goal and trying to do something through nutrition, you have to track what you're doing, at least for a few months. People have very selective memories, and you can't tell where you're going wrong without that tracking. So if you're trying to achieve something through nutrition, losing weight, losing body fat, gaining muscle, getting stronger, whatever it is, number one rule, keep tracking what you're doing. Okay? In as much detail as you can. And then ideally, get somebody to check over that with you. We use a very simple formula. We take people's food diaries, we take a red pen. Everything that's moving you towards your goal stays clean. Everything that's moving away from your goal, we put a red line through it or we circle it. Most people's food diaries come back looking like just a red line roadmap that's covered in red lines. And invariably people bring those food journals back and say, I think my food is pretty good, but maybe a few areas I can improve. And then we get those food journals and they're, for the most part, quite shocking. But people think it's good food. So, track it, then get somebody to have a look at it, somebody that knows what they're doing to have a look. Okay?
Just to interject quickly as well there, a lot of people bring their food in and they say it's quite good, and they also, on the flip side, say, I didn't realise I had this many sugars in my tea, I didn't realise I was eating this many pieces of pizza. So not only they've got this idea in their head of how good their food is, actually realistically there's a few bits where they know it's bad, and then there's all the things on top of that where they didn't know it was bad. So you've gone for what you think is, in your mind, it's a clean slate, then the reality is you know it's a slightly dirty slate, and then in our reality, there's lots more red to add to that. So you don't write it down, don't get it checked. You know, the number of people who almost bring it in and then sheepishly look at it because they know that it's got 4 bits of pizza on it, and then you get the red pen out, you're like that, and then suddenly the realisation is there. So if you don't write it down, you just have no idea, I'm afraid. Unless I don't trust anybody to say, my eating's good until you see.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The full position.
What's your average day like? Oh, and then they'll select from their week, from the days when you listen.
Yeah, it's like if you ask people how much water do you drink? 2 to 3 litres a day. You know what the answer is, so you just say it. Your answer is, oh, about 2 to 3 litres a day. And then you get food diarrhea and you look down it, and there's no 2 to 3 litres a day. Most people are lucky to get 2 glasses a day. Yeah, people have very selective memories. So write it down, get somebody to check it. Don't be embarrassed of it, however bad it is. God knows I've seen worse.
At least being honest, you know, if you just bring in what you think it's meant to say, then you're not going to gain anything from that information.
Absolutely. Okay. So, how do you go about just sorting your nutrition out? Some simple steps. One, like anything, begins with preparation. Okay? It's a cliche, I know, but if you fail to plan, plan to fail. You've got to prepare. This is where most people go wrong. I used to have a thing with my clients for nutrition where I ask them, what are you going to have for lunch tomorrow? And if they don't know what you're going to have for lunch tomorrow, chances are they're going to eat crap food tomorrow. If you don't know what the meal is that you're going to have before you go into that meal, the chances are you're going to eat a bad meal. Okay, this is what most people do, especially in an office environment. It's like, oh, crikey, I'm starting at 1 o'clock, I'll go and get some lunch. Where are you going? Where's your lunch? Where is it? Oh, I don't know, I'll just go to the shops and grab something. Is there a chance that the shop has put on a lovely seafood salad for you with, you know, prawns and bits of lovely lobster and some really fresh green leaves? Like, it's all going to be packet, it's all going to be crap. So if you don't prepare, you are never going to succeed with your nutrition. You absolutely got to get that right. Okay? And that doesn't mean just in terms of preparing for one meal. Number one, if it's in the house, it's getting eaten. I can't tell, it sounds ridiculous, I can't tell you how many times clients told me, oh, I had to have something really bad on Sunday. Why did you have to have something really bad? Oh, well, it was in the cupboard, so it was in the house, it was lying on the side, or the kids had it. That's the worst one, parents. So, oh, I had something bad on Friday, but it was because the kids were eating it, so I had it. Okay, so I don't get that. I haven't got kids, but I don't know why people feed their kids crap that they know they shouldn't be eating. So, number one, if it's in the house, it's going to get eaten. So before you start on your nutrition drive, clear the cupboards out.
We had a client once, we did a session here, we left, and we bought a big chocolate bar, big guy trying to lose a lot of weight, bought a chocolate bar. As he walks past, he looked at it and thought, this is the wrong thing to do. He turned around and walked in, and he handed it over the counter. Preparing is great, I think. Obviously people are going to work away, and you need to not let those excuses come in. Oh, I'm away, so I'll go in. Whilst, you know, the salads and the chicken from Tesco is not really as good as the stuff you can buy from the market. In comparison to the sandwich and the pasta you're going to buy anyway, then that's going to be the best option. Look at it on a sliding scale. If you're having doner kebabs for breakfast, then cereal is going to be a better option. And then work your way down from there. Yeah. Or up, whichever way you go.
Yeah, and research stuff as well. Not research, but you know, I get asked a lot. I'm eating in restaurants a lot now, so I can't really eat that healthy all the time. That's just nonsense. Restaurants do fantastic food, and the chefs are usually. I used to work in a restaurant in the kitchen when I was younger. Chefs love it when people come in and ask for something a little bit. I don't know, they don't want all the chips or whatever. So I just have some jacket potato and some greens. They don't care. The chefs. That's what they do. So don't use excuses like I was eating in restaurants. If you have to entertain clients, there is obviously some degree of pressure for you to take clients out, have a nice meal, and usually there's a fair amount of alcohol being drunk at those. Okay? It doesn't mean the plan's failed, it doesn't mean everything's gone to pot and I'll start again next Monday. It just means factor that into what you've eaten. So if you've had steak with some leaves, or some salad or whatever, get rid of the chips, get rid of the potato, because I know I'm going to have to drink wine. These are good clients, I've got to entertain them, so I'm going to be drinking wine, probably a couple of bottles between us or whatever, so I'm going to factor that in. Today, that's my carbohydrates. Is it the best carbohydrates? No, of course not. But today, that's my carbohydrates, because my job is to entertain these people. As soon as you start looking at it as a kind of an impassable problem, then that's when the guilt and the excuses come in. Oh, well, I messed up now, so I'll start again on Monday. Okay? Only time you fail is when you stop trying. So, the other one, if it's not in the house, it's not going to get eaten. Why didn't you have any good food? We didn't have any good food in. So the problem isn't you didn't want good food. The problem is you didn't actually prepare for it. Again, this is just as common as people having bad food in the house. If you're going to start a new nutrition drive, then you need to go to the supermarket, buy good food, fill the cupboards up. Okay? So, last part of preparation, plan ahead, prepare in advance. Take a couple of hours on a Sunday and make your foods up for that week. It doesn't have to be all of the meal, but you know you're going to have veg with every meal, for example, or most meals. So chop the stuff up, stick it in a Tupperware tub or in a steel tub or whatever you prefer. Stick it in the fridge, and then every time you need to make some food with vegetables, handful in, bomb, and it's done. Okay? Things like stews, bolognese, soups, etc. Anything that can be done slow cooker in a big batch, do that. Stick it in the freezer. Much better fresh. But if the difference between you having a fresh meal cooked from scratch every day and having one in the freezer and heating them up is one, you do it, the other one, you don't do it, because it just becomes a pain for you, and it's always better to stick the stuff in the freezer, reheat it. Okay. Big batches of stuff. Soup, fantastic, get yourself a flask, that's your lunches for the week. Breakfast as well. Okay, so plan ahead, prepare in advance. A good idea on a Sunday afternoon, sit down, get a food diary out, put in what you're going to have. Rather than being reactive, what did I have on Monday? Oh, I have this, I'll write that down. On a Sunday, be proactive. Tomorrow I'm going to have this, this, and this. Write that down, prepare it. Tuesday, this, and this. Write that down, prepare it. Whatever you can, prepare it in advance. Okay? So, number one, key, preparation. Number two is nutrients. The big area really where most people, this comes back to fake foods and processed foods. A real area where people are very low and suffering is nutrients. The food that we eat from the food industry is so devoid of any nutrients. There's a famous book called Beating the Food Giants, or Taking on the Food Giants by Paul Stitt, where he talks about the fact that the reason that we have fortified, you know when they say fortified with this or fortified with that, the reason that we have that is very cleverly spun to make it sound like it's a benefit for us, but the reason we have that is because certain foods were trying to be passed for certification by the FDA. The FDA went back to the food companies that were making these foods, processed foods, this is going back a few years now, and said that we can't classify this as a food. We can't give you a safety certification because in terms of its biological makeup, it isn't a food. It's so devoid of any nutrients we can't classify it, basically. So the solution to it was, we'll put it back through processing, we'll add some B vitamins, some synthetic B vitamins, niacin, we'll put a little bit of additional iron in. They did the minimum necessary, and then the FDA passed it as a food. They were breakfast cereals. So whenever you see fortified with, or now with added, or whatever, it's usually because the food is so devoid of any nutrients that it's had to have stuff added back in. This is why in 2005, Denmark banned all foods that are fortified. In particular, cereals, things like that. Kellogg's thought that was crazy, obviously, because they have to keep their marketing vehicle going. But the Danes are a little bit more honest than some nations or some governments, and they know what fortified with means, so they ban it. Okay, so nutrients is a huge area where people struggle. They eat a lot of processed foods, and you get not very much from it. The way to combat that, these are the main areas where people struggle with their nutrients, usually without knowing it. Dehydration, micronutrients, quality proteins, and quality fats. The way around that, very simply, is that more water, more veg, more good quality meat, and more oily fish, eggs, nuts and oils. Okay? Just replace stuff. Good stuff in, bad stuff out. Okay? All of it ties together. If you get the crap out of the cupboards, you put good stuff in, you put fresh food in, basically what you're doing is you're getting rid of that problem, replacing it with that. Okay? So very, very simple. Don't think so much about macros. People get caught up with what protein should I have, what carbohydrates should I have, what percentages should I have. And a lot of times you look at their food diaries, and that's way off from what the problem is. The problem is there's nothing with nutrient value in this diet. You're not getting any, where's your vitamin A's, where's your B's, where's your C's, etc. There's nothing in there. So, basics first. Do that well, and that will stand you in good stead. Step 3, portions. Okay, again, you don't need to worry too much about calories and weighing everything out. Simple. Just use this method. Roughly, for women, and if you're trying to do fat loss in particular, about 1 palm-sized piece of protein with every meal. Okay? So that part with every meal. For guys, and especially if you're trying to put on muscle and strength, 2 palms. For vegetables, 1 fist-sized portion of vegetables with every meal. For women and for fat loss. If you're trying to do, if you're a guy again, or you're trying to do strength or muscle building, 2 fist sizes. Fat loss, if you're doing fat loss or you know you have an issue with starches, which a lot of people do, I don't do well at all with starches, then skip that bit and just load up on the vegetables. But post-workouts, and if you know you don't have a problem with starches, 1 cup-sized hand of starches, potato, rice, pasta, that type of thing. I'm not really a big fan of pasta. It doesn't exist in nature, so you shouldn't be eating it. That's my opinion. But that's roughly what you want. And then for fats, about a thumb-sized piece for a fat. Okay? This is fairly standard now across the industry. People have come to realise that no one wants to sit there with a calorie calculator all day. Okay, apart from people in the industry. So there has to be a simpler way to work it out. And this is kind of from John Berardi from Precision Nutrition. He uses this. He probably does more testing and more fat loss work than anybody else in the world at the moment. And that's what they use. I found it to be very effective. So all you've got to do is look at your plate every time you're going to eat. I've got palm-sized piece of protein, thumb-sized fat. It could be a few nuts. It could be a quarter of an avocado, something like that. Whatever. It's just a glove of olive oil. Have I got a fist-sized portion of vegetables or 2? And if I'm training for performance or I know I'm okay with starches, cup-sized handful of starches, brown rice, quinoa, things like that. Okay? So, those steps basically is effectively Nutrition 101. Whenever we're working with somebody in PT, this is what we do first of all. We look at their food diary, we underline everything, or we cross through what's in red. The first stage after that is then to get them prepared. The second stage is to get nutrients into the diet, make sure what you're eating is actually full of nutrients. The third stage, portion sizes. Calorie control without counting calories.
You'd be amazed how many people you can get to change without ever needing step 3, just by adding in the right foods and how consistent. If you can do that consistently, and that's the thing, is the consistency part of it. If you do that for 5 days and you lose it for 2, that's when the numbers will be totally skewed. I was trying to, if I'm drawing graphs, Monday to Friday, people are good, and the weekends are it. If that's you, then that's the first thing you need to sort. Don't think that it's the portion size Monday to Friday, it's your weekends.
Yeah, most people, this is another thing as well, most people, kind of just dispelling a few myths, most people will come in a food diary and say, during the week I eat pretty well, at the weekend I go a little bit to pot. From a nutritious point of view, just looking at how many nutrients are in what they're eating, it's usually completely the other way around. What people are eating at the weekend, cooked breakfast, roast dinner, proper lunch, maybe going out somewhere for a lunch. When you look at the foods they're eating, even if you could criticise the quality and say, okay, where did you get your cooked breakfast? Was it an organic cooked breakfast that was all grilled with lots of veg, or was it one from the local cafe? There's differences in quality, but when you just look at what they're actually eating, weekend meals tend to be made much more of real food. Parents have much more time to cook, people have more time to prepare, so what they eat tends to be a lot more healthy. Weekdays is where people go wrong. Full of breakfast cereals, bread, toast, everything's in a sandwich. The only meal that usually is a healthy meal during the week is the evening meal. And usually, because you've had such nutriently void meals throughout the day, you get to the end of the evening, you're so hungry that most people's plate of food looks like 1 palm of protein, one fist of veg, and then an enormous handful, 2 handfuls of carbohydrates, like starchy carbohydrates, rice, potatoes, things like that, pasta. And that's usually where people are going wrong. We had a few questions from people already writing in. Peter was asking about protein powders. Do they work? Which one should you have? Yosra was asking the immune system. How much protein is too much protein and are there any consequences? And also, what foods are good for hair and nails? Anybody else with any questions? We'll kind of get them all together. Lucy?
I was just wondering about timings of when you if that has well. So, because like you say, if you go to the gym after work, you get home at like 8 or something, and then you're starving, but then you go to bed at like 10, so you feel like you just eat and then you go to bed. So does that play a part in?
Yes, it does, Joe.
I was going to say, well, I would say that it doesn't have a huge difference. Like a lot of studies that look at whether you eat 5 times a day, 3 times a day, it just depends a lot of the time what works for you. And that's the problem. A lot of the time with questions, and the answer we give is going to be it depends on the individual. So do timings matter? If it makes it easy for you, then I say timings matter. So for example, having a carbohydrate every breakfast doesn't work for other people because you've slept, your blood sugar's gone down, carbs will elevate your blood sugar, so then you have a drop. So your time with carbohydrates in that sense, whilst that won't have an impact on your fat loss, if we're talking about calories in, calories out, if it makes it easier, it keeps you fuller, then that's going to be good. Anything that can help make it easier. So for example there, you said, it makes it comes back to the thing of, am I allowed to eat carbs after 6? Especially after workout, yes. So in that sense, you want to have your carbs, definitely then. It doesn't matter if you're going to go to bed, it'll actually help with your sleep if you have carbs before you go to bed.
Yeah, there's a big difference between when they do studies on like, for example, athletes and things like that. And there used to be a whole thing about you need to get your nutrients in at least an hour after training and all that sort of stuff. When they've done studies on this, the most recent study on this showed there's absolutely no difference at all. If you get, they used to also think don't have fats after training because it slows down the absorption of protein and carbohydrates into the muscle. The most recent studies on that are showing actually that's not true at all. The fats don't slow anything down, and if you get your proteins and your carbs, your nutrients in 2 hours after you eat, there's absolutely no difference in protein synthesis from if you did it 10 minutes after you eat. So in those terms, timing doesn't really matter that much. It's more important, as Joe said, for it to fit into your lifestyle, for it to work for you. However, getting home from training at 9 o'clock, knowing that you're going to bed at 10:30, and then eating a big dinner, I still think, especially if you're trying to do fat loss, that is going to be a blocker for you. So all you have to do is just work around it. So if you know you're going to train at 9, make sure that the vast majority of your meals, your main meals, are done before that, then train, then a protein drink or whatever kind of lighter supplement that you want to take for like a, not supplement, but lighter meal that you want to take that's not going to sit on your stomach, and then do it that way. Okay? So still try and get your meals in during the day in a way, as Joe said, that works for you timing-wise. But if you know that you're training late enough that whatever you do eat is going to sit on your stomach because you have to go to bed, then I would try and train with something lighter.
The thing about spacing out your calories and your protein equally, so for example, when people have coffee for breakfast and a small lunch, then a huge dinner, it's just how your body can deal with that. You want to have your protein equally spaced. So for the reason that means you want to be able to keep, if you're doing fat loss, you want to be able to keep as much muscle as possible. It's not necessarily about building muscle, it's about maintaining muscle. If you lose muscle, you then become less metabolically active. You will be fatter, for want of a better term. So you want to keep those protein spacings equal. So if you're having your biggest portion at 9:30 at night, odds on by the sound of it, it's probably not been equally spaced throughout the day.
Yeah, and that's even, when they do medical studies on atrophy and just essentially degeneration of the system, we've had so much hype about fat loss. You've got to watch your fat levels. You've got to get your fat levels down. From a purely medical level, muscle atrophy is actually far more detrimental to the metabolism.
That's muscle loss.
So losing muscle is much more detrimental than gaining fat. If you gain fat to the point where you're actually clinically obese, then that obviously takes on a real serious note. But muscle depletion, muscle breaking down in the body, and you losing muscle is actually much more detrimental to the system than fat gain. The body can deal with fat, and in a sense, it's trying to store fat to protect you. Obviously, the trip switch has gone a little bit haywire for some people, and it just goes on and on and on. Diabetes, same thing. But the body doesn't want to be losing muscle. Anything that it's doing muscle breaking in a very catabolic, it's very detrimental to the system. So you've got to keep those proteins up and spaced out.
Not to sound like a sales pitch as well, but with the 30-day fat loss thing you've been running,
Yeah.
although it's all high intensity work, the number of people who've put muscle on is nearly everybody has put on a kilo or so, and that's not because they've been doing weight training, that's because they've been giving their body adequate amounts of protein. So their previous diets, they're actually losing muscle, they were carrying less muscle than they naturally should have been. You know, everybody has their different builds, you know, bigger guys, bigger ladies will hold more muscle, more people will hold less. A lot of the people doing the 30 days have been holding less than they naturally should because they've not been eating enough before. So just by putting enough protein in, their body's then going to finally, we've now got enough protein to work with, we can get back to our natural level. So people are putting on muscle just by eating enough, not by doing any kind of real resistance work.
And the other way around as well, sometimes we'll body fat people and find, oh, your fat's gone up. And we go, oh God, I've got fatter. When you look at the actual composition, they haven't got fatter, they haven't put fat on, they've just lost muscle. The training that they're doing, coupled with the nutrition plan they're following, is essentially just breaking down muscle. A Weight Watchers kind of know that.
Eat less with more.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. And that's what a lot of places rely on. I can't remember the last time I went into a gym or I teach other trainers. I can't remember the last time I worked with teaching trainers where they were doing body fat testing. And I've never met a trainer that told me, oh no, I don't do body fat work with people. Every trainer does body fat. Every gym offers body fat protocols, etc. And yet, I rarely meet another trainer outside of Primal or our other place that uses body fat measurements. So you can see that they've lost weight, but are you losing muscle? Are you losing fat? You have to know that. You've got to keep your protein levels up throughout the day to make sure you're not losing muscle. So, Lucy, did that answer your question? Okay. So, we'll go to one from Joshua. If anybody else has got any questions, just stick your hand up, shout them out. So, it's quite a common one. They get asked from women. There you go. That's the answer. Jot these down. Protein is the building block for hair, nails, eyes even. Protein is the building block, and fat. So, if you have trouble with skin, if you have trouble with anything dry, if you have trouble with hair, nails, that's your food list.
Can I just ask why it's orange and yellow veg? Is there a reason?
Beta carotene.
Okay.
Yes, beta carotene. You need lots of vitamin A basically. Those orange and yellow veg contain beta carotene. Beta carotene is a converted form of retinol, vitamin A. Okay.
Just one more thing, sorry.
Yes, go on.
In terms of like multi-seeded, because that's another term that we see quite a lot, is that like a red herring as well?
Multi-seeded just usually is that just, normally they're not going out and finding the best choice seeds. They'll normally, again, they'll go to a factory that was using seeds for something, they'll get those and they just sprinkle them on. But yeah, again, seeds is one. There are a lot of nutritionists that sort of suggest the first thing to do, all nuts, seeds, legumes, pulses, get them all out of the diet, grains, everything that's like that, get that out of the diet and start reintroducing them one at a time. But yeah, some people do have problems eating the seeds. It's quite
The
common.
purpose of taking everything out and reintroducing is to see what affects you, because it's hard to know when you've got a diet so full of things that have potential effects that you need to put them back in one at a time. So then you can actually work out what's causing issues.
Someone said with nuts and seeds and legumes and stuff, if you soak them overnight and then they're there.
Yeah, because it removes the phytates. When I was saying before, a lot of people can't digest beans. It just kind of sits in the stomach and gets gassy and bloated. It's the phytate lining around the seed or the nut or whatever that we have trouble breaking down for some people. So if you soak them first, 24 hours of soaking, that breaks down the phytate lining, and then that allows them to be a little bit more digestible. For some people, not everyone. The other thing with nuts as well is, nuts as a snack means a thumb-sized portion of nuts for a snack. Not, like some people did on the first 30-day fat loss, a 250 gram bag of nuts. Bomb. Gone. In one. Did that for 2 or 3 days in a row, and I think she put on about 2 kilos just from eating nearly a kilo of nuts in 2 days, okay? So, if you're the type of person that opens a bag of nuts, eats one, then spends the rest of the day just looking at that bag of nuts and eating one until the whole bag's gone, don't take the whole bag with you, okay? Again, preparation. Leave them at home, take a little handful and portion size. Citrus fruits, again, that's a good one, citrus fruits, because some people can't digest citrus fruits. They have a problem with fruit, with citrus. That's quite common. So again, is an orange good for you? Absolutely. Not if you can't digest citric acid. Water and tea. And then of course, stress, sleep, sunshine. De-stress, get lots of sleep, lots of sunshine. Okay. How much protein is too much? Is there a consequence? Good one, this is put 2 nutritionists in a room. This will keep them entertained for about 8 hours. So, the standard recommendation has always been 0.8 grams per kilo of body weight. That's pretty much diet of death now, and as a rule we're up to about, or as a guideline, we're up to roughly between 1 and 2 grams of protein for most people, depending on what you're trying to do. Your metabolism comes into it a little bit, but essentially 1 to 2 grams. If I'm working with guys and girls that aren't getting enough protein, I'll go for 2 grams per kilogram. If I'm working with people that are trying to add on mass, then I'll go for 3 grams per kilogram. Joe highlighted a study the other day that's recently been done, where they've taken people up to 4.4 grams per kilo with no adverse effects to body composition. The beauty of protein is that there's 2, Joshua, this will answer part of your question. There's 2 good things about protein. Number 1, you can eat as much of it seemingly as you want, and it doesn't affect body fat, which is kind of where Atkins was dipping his toe in discovery. The other thing is that the body has a mechanism that prevents you from overeating on protein. Okay, they used to think it's the alpha in the brain. I'm not quite sure exactly where it is now, what the mechanic is, largely hormonal they think, but essentially, whenever they've tried to overfeed, as cruel as it sounds, they've done this study on prisoners a few times, where they've tried to overfeed prisoners on carbohydrates, and it's very effective. You can make people very fat very quickly, overfeeding them on carbohydrates, because they will just keep eating and eating and eating and eating. Protein, you can't do it, and fat. It's very, very difficult to overeat on protein and fat. So, on the one hand, it doesn't affect body composition, and on the other hand, as a double whammy, you can't eat too much of it anyway. So it's very good for dieting.
So can I just clarify, when you say like 1 to 2 kilograms of protein per body weight, you don't actually need a way of saying, for example, the chicken breast is
Of the protein. Yes, absolutely. So like in a 250 gram piece of chicken breast, there's about 40 grams of protein. You can get lists, if you Google online, 20 grams of protein, you can get lists of how much protein, how much chicken do I need for 20 grams, how much. As a rough guide though, actually I think it's about a third, isn't it? I think it's about a third. So 120, 150 gram piece of chicken will have about 40 to 60 grams of protein.
No, 54. Yeah. 4.5 grams per kilo is a ridiculous amount.
That's a lot of protein,
by the way. It's a really good way to bring people from who have been anorexics to get their calories up. As soon as you put carbs and fats in, people have to react to those things. You can. I think there's a guy called Jacob Wilson who does a lot of protein, and he put up to 800 calories more protein into his diet without burning fats. So if you are one of those people who are trying to lose weight, you look at your food diary and you think there's not a lot of food here, that's pretty much the way to get calories up. Because we talked about calories being, if you are on a low, I've seen people who are on 1,000 calories who are overweight and not losing weight. Yeah. And one of those things you tell the trainers that that's not possible. But if someone's doing your food diaries, you have to look for an alternative solution. That tends to be it. What are you going to say, Bruce?
What are good veggie alternatives to protein?
Pulses.
Beans, lentils, nuts.
Yeah, beans. If you do eggs, obviously eggs. Pulses. Nuts are good, but if you go too far with nuts, you've got so much fat in there as well. So it is quite difficult, isn't it?
There are lots of protein powders you can use, whilst it's not, it's just trying to find a way around things. Yeah, that's probably the best way around it sometimes. If it's a case of no protein or having something, shakes really makes so much.
So the other part of that question from Joshua about is there any consequence? You often hear if you eat too much protein it's going to give you kidney failure. There's all sorts of cancers linked with too much protein. Without going too far into this, because it's a minefield of research, but that's basically it in a nutshell. So far the research does not support that at all. Most of the studies that say this thing's going to give you, eating meat's going to give you cancer, are either very poorly conducted or they're what's called epidemiological studies, which is essentially they're just observing. So, for example, what they do is they say people that eat less red meat tend to have less bouts of bowel cancer. So the natural reaction is to think, well, red meat must cause bowel cancer. But what people forget is that people that pay attention to news scares about red meat are also the type of people that go to gyms. They're also the type of people that don't smoke. They're also the type of people that get good quality fats into their diet and eat a lot of fruit and veg. They're the type of people that get to bed early and drink lots of water. So are they getting cancer because they're not, or avoiding cancer because they're not eating red meat? Or are they avoiding cancer because they're a healthy person and they're doing everything else right? An epidemiological study doesn't highlight that. So it's you can't link causality, basically, to it. Okay? You can't say we observe this and therefore that means that. You can only say it's an indication that that might be that. But whenever they've done very clinical trials, cohort studies, etc., there is no correlation. So, same thing goes for kidney failure as well. You often hear that too much protein is good bad for the kidneys. There's nothing to support that. The only thing there is to support that, two things. Number one, if you already have bad kidneys or damaged kidneys, too much protein can be a problem. So they tend to keep people below about 20% of total nutrients. The other thing is that there has been observed that when people eat higher protein content, about 30% of their diet, then the kidneys can react with what's called hyperfiltration, which basically means the filtration system in the kidney grows, it gets bigger. But there's no scientific proof that that is actually a bad thing. It happens in people with one kidney as well, so it doesn't mean it's bad, it's just something that they're observing. But so far, Joshua, no, there is no consequence to eating too much protein, largely because the body just won't let you eat too much. You would have to really struggle to overeat on protein. Okay? So, any other questions before we go through the 3 golden rules?
Something that's been suggested to me quite a lot for fat loss is low carb diets.
Yes.
What are the risks and benefits
Okay.
of a low carb diet? The risks and the benefits? Well, the benefit would be it depends on your natural body shape. Now, for you, who's quite a big guy, you would assume you consume that food that's called metabolic typing, that your traditional endomorph means that so you've got ectomorphs who are skinny, mesomorphs who are more athletic, endomorphs who are more built and tend to carry more fat. They tend to operate better on high fats. That would be the initial reaction as to why that would be a good idea. Risks, it's going to be quite hard work, you might not feel great for the first few days. When people first start out on diets, like we alluded to before, people tend to get overweight because they're eating too much sugar. So you then have to essentially book that trend and teach your body how to work off fats. So when you have marathon runners hit the wall, that's because their blood sugar has run out, their muscle glycogen has run out, and their bodies cannot access the fat stored in their body. So they're running on nothing, essentially, until your body breaks that fat down. So that's what you have when you first start a low carb, zero carb, keto style diet. It will take your body a while to learn how to metabolize fats.
Yeah. The other detriments that they're now finding is that, especially in women on very low carb diets, there is an effect on the adrenals, or there seems to be at the minute. The preponderance of evidence is pointing towards that there is an effect on the adrenals. Because if there isn't enough carbohydrates to keep your blood sugar levels up, and you can't burn ketogenic, you can't go ketogenic very efficiently, which most people in the West don't to start with because they're so used to burning sugars, the adrenals have to kick in to keep you going, basically. So they basically, adrenal function replaces carbohydrate blood sugar levels. And that causes a lot of problems in the adrenals, especially for Western women, because they tend to be under a hell of a lot of stress most of the time. So that is what's coming out of, and that's from people doing studies on paleo diets, basically, looking at very low carbs, looking at the effects on the adrenals. It can be a big problem. It can be a big problem. So again, it's something that I guess it's like anything. If you pick a paradigm and follow it blindly, then it's probably going to lead you down a dead end. You're probably going to end up replacing one problem with another problem. It's about taking a paradigm, thinking, I'll try this, using it, bring it back a bit more, bring it back a little bit, and working out what works for you. But my go-to thing for fat loss is get rid of the carbohydrates. Not the vegetables and the fruit, not too much fruit, but keep that in because that's where your nutrients are. But largely things like rice, pasta, bread, potatoes, for a start even sweet potatoes, get rid of all of those and then start reintroducing things a little bit more slowly. And then when you remove those things, fill that void on your plate with vegetables.
The leaner you get, the more your body will tolerate carbohydrates.
Yes.
So you would have, this is where the idea of refeed comes from, because at some point in your life you really want to have carbohydrates, I assume. So after 2 weeks you'd have a day where you would then drop your fats down and replace them with carbohydrates for a day. See how you feel. You'll probably feel absolutely fantastic for a day of having high carbs. Then basically follow that process, and then once you get leaner, you can try every week, every couple of days. This is why athletes work so well with carbs and stay lean, because their body's used them. So you may find that if you do physical endeavours, you're sports of any kind, then put them in before you train or after you train. They're the best times to have them, preferentially.
Do you ever any danger of going up ketones though from not eating enough carbs?
No, ketones themselves aren't dangerous. Ketoacidosis is dangerous, but that's not the same thing. That's a bit like saying, it's a good question, but it's like saying if I eat too many, I'm diabetic, or I'm eating too many sugars, is that dangerous? Well, no, mostly not, but if it gets to the point where you become diabetic, then it is. And ketones is exactly the same thing. Burning ketones is a natural thing, but there are mechanisms that can occur that send that into a bad thing. And ketoacidosis, that's a different thing from just being ketogenic. Most of the world records now in big endurance events are being set by people on keto diets because it's just a much more efficient fuel source. So when you look at people who are doing the big runs in, like 100-kilometer runs and the 7 marathons in 7 days and things like that, and longer even than the Ironmans, when you look at those big events, those long endurance events, most of the world records are now being set by ketogenic runners, ketogenic athletes. And in fact, have been for probably the last decade or so. Yeah, it's a bit uncomfortable when you first start ketogenic. It's a bit smelly, but you get used to it real quick.
So when you're doing like a low carb thing, is that something does it supersede like calorie counting, or do you have to have low calories as well as low carbs?
No, you want to try, do it, don't make it too complicated. How much food am I having? I'm going to remove the carbohydrates, and I'm going to fill, even though carbohydrates are vegetables are carbohydrates, I'm going to remove the starches, and I'm going to fill that void with half protein, half more vegetables. So it's a good question, because this is a big mistake that people make. You say, I don't want you eating starchy carbs, no breakfast cereals, which are the worst, no bread, etc., no pasta, no white rice, get rid of all of that. So they remove that, and then, Peter will probably tell you, this happens on 30-day fat loss type things. People are feeling okay for the first couple of days, their fat's coming down, their body weight's coming down, and then they start feeling like crap. And they bring their food diary in, and essentially what they've done is they've removed 2/3 of what they've been eating, and they haven't replaced it with anything. You can't do that. At some point the body's going to crash against that. So you've got to replace those calories, but don't think about it in terms of, right, okay, 4 grams of fat, 4 grams. Just look at your plate, okay, I've removed that, and to fill that back in again. And usually that will keep you going.
That's why I recommend the oilier fish and fattier meats, because sometimes, say you're having chicken and pasta and veg, and you take out the pasta, suddenly all you've got is protein. You've got 20-30 grams of protein in front of you. It's 120 calories. There's no way you're in this room could have 120 calories for a meal and feel satisfied or getting off their body with that. So that's when you have stuff like the chicken legs, chicken thighs, getting fats from there. That would be mentioned.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned like diabetes a few times, and I'm guessing most of the time you mean type 2 diabetes.
Type 2 diabetes, yes.
I'm just curious to know if you're a type 1 diabetic and you try to like change your nutrition and improve it and remove some of those like starchy carbs and things, is that quite dangerous, or can it be done?
No, well there's a lot of people who are doing tests now by removing the carbohydrates and replacing them with fats like coconut oil. And that's proven to be quite successful. Obviously type 1 diabetes isn't really something that's reversible, but type 2 diabetes is actually
The medical industry, I've got the diabetes revolution I've got, which talks about replacing you start your carbs with your lower GI carbs, now people then use less insulin. So you're then putting less of a fake substance into your body. So in that sense, it's going to be beneficial. Just looking to Darren for agreement.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Sorry, I'm just curious. Is that good?
I couldn't tell you if
Okay.
That's quite cool. Diabetes evolution. It's quite shocking.
Yeah, they're starting to work a lot on that. I know Dr. McCullough, Joseph McCullough, is always fighting new studies on this that people are working with, in particular coconut oil and phosphoric acid, etc. And having good results.
This is where coconut oil is quite good. It's a lot of fats, they're quite hard to break down, so they're really long chains. Coconut oil is what's called an MCT, or a medium chain, so it's much smaller. So if you had a spoonful of coconut oil, it would be much easier for your body to convert that into energy. So for example, if you're going keto, they're the kind of fats you want to look for. Or if you're going to give that a go, because it would be easier for your body to get energy out of stuff like MCT.
Coconut oil is like a superfood. It's fantastic for everything. So.
And let's start off screen loads of it.
Yeah, don't eat, globs of it, but yeah.
Darren said
A teaspoon of coconut oil 3 times a day, fantastic. Models survival and stuff, so I'm told. So yeah. Peter, your question about protein. So protein powders, if you're going to use protein powders, rule of thumb, just like food. Is protein powders better for you than eating roast chicken? No, not at all. As a supplement though, there are some that are pretty good. There's a few issues with protein powder. Number one, like anything, it's only as good as the source. So if I'm having protein powders, if it's whey protein, I want to know, number one, can I get on with dairy? Because if I don't get on with dairy, I don't do dairy very well, then I can't do whey. Okay? If I can't do whey, then there's no point in me doing whey powders. So the first thing is you've got to know, are you okay with whey and dairy? If you're not, then you should be looking at a pea and hemp protein, or possibly a brown rice protein, a sprouted brown rice protein. They're probably your best 2 options. Casein is an option, and egg white albumin is an option, but they tend to be quite disgusting in taste, and they're quite difficult for a lot of people to digest those. They tend to be nighttime bodybuilder proteins, where they take a ton of it at night or wake up at 4 in the morning and get that in. For most people, my general, if I don't know you and I've not worked with you, my general rule of thumb is a pea and hemp protein, because the chances are that's not going to cause any reactions. And then you want something that is completely natural. So you don't want any fake sugars. If it's got os on the end of it, don't have it. If it's got any ingredients in it you can't pronounce, you don't want it. As close to natural as possible. Minimum amount of ingredients. If there's any ingredients that you can't pronounce, it's probably not really good, etc. And again, if you are okay with whey, then you want a whey powder that's hormone-free and grass-fed. Okay, if it's not hormone-free, then God only knows what's in it. And if it's not grass-fed, the nutrients in the whey come from the food that the cow's eating. And most of the nutrients that are produced that are beneficial in dairy are coming from the grass that the cow's eating. That combination of what's going on is what's making the goodness in the milk. So if the cows are being fed on grains, a lot of that is lost. So again, you're starting with a very nutrient-depleted food.
A lot of protein companies actually buy their whey from the same place.
Yes,
and it's just themselves. Is it Connecticut? They're the ones
Yeah,
that their own cows.
factory in
That's
Germany.
something that you want to go down Connecticut.
When's a good time to take it?
When is a good time?
Or after? Or?
It depends how your breakfasts are. If your breakfasts are, if you haven't nailed your breakfast, like if I say to someone, what are you eating for breakfast? I had lamb chops and some green beans this morning. Right, we don't need any protein for your supplements for breakfast. If you're still struggling a little bit with breakfasts, then protein shake for breakfast is a good idea to get started.
I'm doing an early fast here.
Yeah.
Sort of 2 or 3 days a week, and breakfast before that isn't really a goer at all. So protein shake,
Straight after.
hot straight afterwards is a good time to do it.
That would be a good sign if you're looking to have something. It depends how you work. Some people can eat before they train, so we can't that really time we have some maybe some green chain, MCTs, and that would just manage the train off.
Yeah.
If you don't deal with carbs, if you do deal with carbs, then you should be good to go.
And then definitely after training as well.
So that's where it comes down to. It depends. Should I eat before I train? Is it going to make you sick? Yeah, well, don't do it then. If you feel I can eat 5 minutes while I train, I'll be fine. So then it's a good time to do.
when you look at like bodybuilder competition profiles for timing, they tend to go like 20 grams of protein pre-training, about an hour before training, 10 grams during training, usually in the form of amino acids, like amino acid tabs or whatever, and then about 20 to 30 grams post-training. Within half of that in half an hour, and then the rest of it within the next hour and a half. But again, that's what they use. Studies have shown that the timing actually is fairly relevant. But that's kind of one of those things that bodybuilders do. It works for them, and even though the science says there's nothing to timing, that's what they stick to, and it tends to work.
A lot of the time, with people like that, it makes 0.5% difference, and some people don't do it for people like us. So you look at the broader picture, those first kind of rules before you've got this attractive food.
And as a rule of thumb, Peter, the more sciencey sounding the name of the protein powder, the more crap's in it. So things like PhDs and whatever you see the other ones, anything with max.
All-in-ones, anything like that, they tend to, just look at what's in it, the breakdown. Because I remember in my youth drinking a protein shake, I was trying to lose weight and then realising I had 30 grams of carbs and 300 calories. And then you learn to make sure you do that.
Yeah, your best bet is just a pure protein and then add your own carbohydrates to it. If you handful of spinach, half a banana, whatever else you want to do, that's the best way. So, any more questions? Yes?
What do you think of tofu as opposed to vegan?
I think it tastes very bland, I don't like it, but it's as a protein replacement. If it works for you, then again, it's quite difficult with tofu because a lot of times what the West does is looks at what they're eating in the Orient and say, well, they're eating that and it must be therefore really good for you because they're all really healthy, they don't get cancer, etc., etc. So then what they do, Monsanto will set up a load of big fields and start growing that thing and then turning it into the Western version, like soy, unfermented soy, the Western version of something in another part of the world that's actually eaten in a slightly different way. So what we eat here as tofu sometimes isn't the same as what's being made over there as tofu. However, it will come down to what your particular system is. So if you don't find yourself lacking in energy, if you find that your muscle mass is maintained, that you're doing quite well with your weight, and your workouts are energized, etc., and tofu is in your diet, then tofu is probably doing good. If you find that you're, like I've got a vegetarian friend who's not in the best shape, he used to eat lots of tofu, he was always overweight, he was always gassy, he never had any energy. It may not be the tofu, but I would suggest maybe try and find something different from tofu. So it's a difficult one to answer. Japanese people would say it's fantastic. If it works for you, then use it. Okay. I think if somebody's having tofu all the time, because they don't want to eat meat, so they're having tofu all the time, then you're in the same danger as any other overly abundant food if you're just eating that thing all the time as a replacement. But once or twice a week, a few times a week, it's certainly better than not eating any protein in nutrition. Any other questions?
Super quick, can you do some really good iron sources?
Iron, red meat, spinach, nuts, a little bit of eggs. The best source of iron, Lucy, is red meat. There are two different types of iron. There's hemi-iron and non-hemi-iron, and hemi-iron is much more easy for the body to utilise. There's also iron in dairy, but it's much harder for the body to utilise. Red meat is the best source of iron and the most usable source of iron that there is. So that's, yeah. Okay, so we'll wrap it up. Any other questions, just shout them out. 3 golden rules, just to go as a guideline. Wasn't it 10,000 years ago? Now epigenetics has kind of given this one a kick in the pants, where they basically study there's a difference between how genetic makeup and actually how those genes are then expressed. And epigenetics is basically changing the way that your genes are expressed. And they're now finding that the amount of bacteria in our gut is actually affecting the way that we can convert certain foods. So this used to be pretty much an absolute certainty. It wasn't here 10,000 years ago, we can't digest it, it isn't good for you. Now genetic research is showing that actually we might not be able to use it, but the bugs inside us have learned to, and they're utilising it very well. So now that one's up in a little bit up in the air. But as a general rule, if you're in a supermarket looking at a food thinking, I wonder if this is good for me, if you couldn't have got it 10,000 years ago, it probably isn't doing you any good. Number two, if it's advertised on TV, it's probably no good for you. There are some exemptions, like when they do, this kilo of apples for 50p down or whatever. Of course, apple's good for you. But for the most part, it's being advertised, especially kids' food. It's full of sugar, it's not full of fun and happiness and joyful moments. It's full of sugar, additives, artificial crap. And if it's got an ingredients list, you've pretty much already gone wrong. There's no ingredients on chicken, there's no ingredients on apples. So if you turn the packet over, pretty much if it's in a packet, you've probably gone wrong. But if you turn the packet over and there's an ingredients list, then you need to start questioning. If there's a long ingredients list, put it back. If there's anything on the ingredients list you can't pronounce, then it's not good for you, it's not real. Okay, so they're kind of your 3 golden rules. Yeah, as usual, don't believe everything I say. Yeah, I'm just going on what's known right now. So if something works better for you, then try that, use that. Okay, read stuff, look stuff up. Nutrition's like anything, like any goal in life, it needs to be a little bit of a personal journey. Coaches are only there to guide you, not to do all the work for you. So I always tell people this when I'm doing lectures and stuff. Don't believe everything I say just because I've told you it. Look it up, read it for yourself, find out about the things that you want to know. The next one that we do of these is going to be on setting goals and making changes. With a guy called Stefanos, who's going to come in and do a talk on that. Okay, good stuff. Hope this has helped, and hopefully see you next time.